From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. You haven't heard the word bipartisanship used very much lately when it comes to news out of Washington. Republicans control the presidency and both chambers of Congress, and they're making big policy moves. But my guest today still sees value in members of the two parties working together. Democratic Congressman Jason Crow represents Colorado's 6th district in the U.S. House of Representatives, which includes Aurora and parts of Denver. He served for 6 years on what's called the Four Country Caucus, a group of Republican and Democratic military veterans in the House. Crow says it started with a pledge between the members.
Basically, the pledge says we're not going to attack each other or malign each other in public or in private. We're going to co-sponsor each other's legislation. And, 6 years later, almost, we have passed over 100 bills into law, which makes us one of the most effective caucuses in Congress.
Representative Crow recently wrapped a 2-year term as co-chair of the caucus. We invited him on to share what he sees happening in Washington and why he thinks the Veterans Caucus is an important group in Congress in this moment.
The past 3 weeks have been wild and a torrent of really dangerous things coming out of this new administration that threaten people's way of life here in Colorado and around the country. And I'm certainly pushing back on that. So I'm not naive in recognizing the threat that we face from this administration. But at the same time, I have an obligation to try to make Congress work and to try to preserve some bipartisanship there.
Yeah, as you just alluded to, the atmosphere in D.C. doesn't feel terribly bipartisan at the moment, especially with Republicans in control of both the House and the Senate and the executive branch. How do you see Democrats in Congress and really bipartisanship writ large having an impact in the Trump era?
Well, this is the challenge. This is the ultimate leadership challenge right now for Democrats and even Republicans that want to push back and preserve some sanity and actually functionality of Congress and our co-equal branches. So the challenge is this: how do we and when do we stand firm and push back and fight versus where we work together and preserve bipartisanship and try to maintain the functioning system in Congress, right?
Yeah.
We can do both. We have to do both, because at the end of this, if we come out of this tumultuous period and everybody has given up on the project of bipartisanship and collaboration, and everyone's just retreated to their partisan corners, then we're all lost, right? Then we have given in to what Donald Trump and others want to do, and that is to dismantle our system of government and democracy. And I'm not willing to give in to that.
We're only a few weeks into this new administration. There's already been a slew of divisive policy announcements from the Trump administration. One that I want to touch on is the promise of massive immigration action in cities, including Denver and Aurora. Also, the idea being floated of detaining immigrants at Buckley Space Force Base, which falls within your district, Congressman. How are you working to address concerns around federal immigration raids?
Well, first of all, I'm being really clear what is and is not happening and what they're talking about, because what Donald Trump is trying to do is demonize immigrants, right? This is what they do. They take these instances of criminality, violent offenders, and there are some, a very small number, and then they say, hey, there are these violent offenders, and that represents migrants and refugees writ large in the entire community, and now we got to deport all of them. That's absurd. Right? No, I don't know of anybody that says that we shouldn't enforce our criminal laws and try to keep our communities safe. So my task and what I'm doing is being very clear that we have laws already against this stuff. We should enforce those laws, but I will not allow immigrants and refugees in my community and in Colorado to be demonized and to be misrepresented as violent criminals. Because these are business owners, they are members of our community, they are a part of the fabric of my district and our state, and they contribute greatly to that. And I will defend that notion of immigration in America as being a net positive for us and humanize the issue.
And what does the Veterans Caucus do to advance immigration policy?
The Veterans Caucus hasn't taken on a lot on the immigration front.
Okay.
And when we have, it's been around veterans issues. When we have dealt with immigration, it's been around instances where veterans have been rounded up and deported. So there have been instances of people that have served in the military that are not U.S. citizens that have been deported in some instances,
Mm.
and that of course is absurd and cannot be allowed to stand. And I've worked with some folks in a bipartisan way to address that and fix it when that happens.
Let's talk about presidential pardons. On
Mhm.
his very first day back in office, President Trump pardoned around 1,500 or 1,600 people who had been charged in the January 6th raid on the Capitol. President Biden pardoned members of his own family. What are your thoughts about presidential pardon powers, and can Congress do much about them?
Well, it's pretty clear that presidential pardon powers are ripe for reform. So the lesson learned here is that I think we need to add teeth to congressional oversight and remedies, recourse. So when somebody ignores these really important things or abuses a pardon power. So I would like to see some pardon reform to provide some guardrails. I want to see some Supreme Court ethics reform because there's really none. There are really no ethical standards that apply to the Supreme Court and potential conflicts of interest. And we've seen that arise over and over again the last couple of years. I'd like to see more enforcement ability by Congress when the executive branch just ignores congressional mandate.
Do you see much appetite for pardon reform and Supreme Court ethics reform from other lawmakers, including in the Veterans Caucus?
I do see appetite for it. Uh,
Uh-huh.
Frankly, mainly on the Democratic side of the aisle. There's not as much bipartisanship on that as I would like to see. But I'm gonna keep on working on it.
One final question. Where do you see opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to work together on legislation in this political atmosphere?
Yeah, I think on veterans issues, there's a lot of bipartisanship. Tech reform, reform of social media, for example. Many of us are parents, and this is actually a pretty bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democratic families alike are really struggling with the really nefarious effects of social media and some technology on our children and on our families. And there's a lot of appetite for some regulation and oversight of that because it's just way out of control. Anybody sitting around listening to this who is trying to put some guardrails again around their children's use of social media and what they're being served there and the things they're getting, I think will sympathize with that struggle.
Democratic Representative Jason Crow represents Colorado's 6th Congressional District. He spoke with me about the 4-country caucus made up of veterans in the House of Representatives.